I think what we'll do is we'll start talking about some of the more boring aspects of risotto, and then we can get right into cooking. If there are any questions, I'll try to answer them as we go along, but if there's anything that you need to know, I'll be answering some of the questions later on as well after we go through the live stream. So please feel free, send in some messages and let me know what you're thinking. The one thing I want to talk about risotto is it's more the method and the technique that you should be interested in. The actual application of risotto is up to you, really. I mean, the types of rice are important, and we'll go through that in a minute. But in terms of the cheese that you use, whether or not you're doing a vegan risotto, we'll talk about that a little bit later too, how you can actually make vegan risotto. Today we'll be using an application using chicken stock and doing more traditional method using Parmesan and just some fine herbs because I want to accent the flavor of the scallops. But then we'll go into a little bit more about some other starch variations that you can use instead of just rice and have a little fun with the dish. I think everybody gets so caught up with traditional, and it's so important for us to know that cooking is a lot of fun, and in order for you to enjoy it, it's all about throwing your own spin on things. So yes, stay true to the classics and use a lot of the traditional aspects in the original stages so you know what it should taste like, but then you can take it as far as you want to. You can use your favorite cheese, so a Bellavitano, you can use a Fontina, but more traditionally they use Parmesan cheese. Right? The Italian risotto traditionally originated in northern Italy and Lombardy, and it was a peasant dish. It was more of a rice soup, if you will, that people would flavor with Parmesan cheese and butter. There are a lot of considerations of risotto, whether or not it contains cream. Traditionally, no. Risotto in Italy was always creamed with just the cheese and the butter at the end. However, when it got closer to the French influence and how close France is to Italy, that started to show some derivatives of cream being added to the risotto. But traditionally, risotto is only made with Parmesan cheese and finished with butter. Good olive oil. Most important thing about a risotto is making sure that the ingredients are fantastic. Like every Italian dish, really important that the aspects of the dish are all about the ingredients. Usually very simple, but using fantastic ingredients, okay? So we're gonna go over just a couple of the variations of rice that we can use. Now I used Pasquale Brothers. Just so you guys know, Pasquale Brothers is in Etobicoke. They didn't ask me to do this, I did this for them because they're an outstanding company that's been around for about 100 years. And what they do, they have the family aspect to it. So they're a family-run business, have been for that long, and they really reach out with the community. Now they're delivering to door. And what they've been able to do for me is they were able to give me a couple of different varieties of rice and some other samples that we can talk about. I'm going to ask my son to turn down the stock on the stove there. Billy, if you could do that for me, that'd be great. Okay? So we'll go over some of the rices that we can use when we're doing risotto. We'll talk a little bit about the rices and the reason why they're so important to the type of risotto in Italy. Okay, being an Italian dish, I chose today to use cannaroli. So cannaroli is an Italian rice that is prized as being the caviar of rice. It is I would say the highest, the best used rice in Italy in terms of creating an outstanding risotto. It's a little bit more forgiving, so it has a little bit more of a bite compared to an arborio, which is probably what you see more of classically in the grocery store. And there are variations, so you can go from a superior grade, which this particular cannaroli that I picked up is the highest grade that Pasquale serves. Basically the grains are it's a medium, not a short grain rice. It's a little bit firmer, and it has very high starch content, and that's key to a risotto. Picking the style of rice that has a lot of starch influence so that it can cream the dish really well, okay? This is the second variety of cannaroli. This is a second grade, so it's still a great quality cannaroli, but it's not quite as fine as their number one grade. And these are both imported from Italy. Another one is a Bologna Nano. This is another variety of rice that they use for production of risotto, not as much as the cannaroli. I would say the two highest influence of rice in terms of production of risotto are the Canaroli and probably the Violano Nano are the two most important. Arborio is more of a North American thing. We produce arborio in California as well, so that arborio tends to find its way into the supermarket shelves. It is not as forgiving, so if you're a little bit worried about overcooking the rice, I would say go with something like a Canaroli for sure, would be the direction I would go, okay? Let me just put this to the side for a second. Some other things that are interesting and fun to use in terms of risotto as well, you can create risotto using some other types of rice. So for example, in Spain, bomba rice, that's traditionally used for paella, but it does have a starch content that would allow you, not as creamy as a Canaroli, but definitely does have enough starch that you can produce a risotto with it. Some things that you might not think of using for risotto, frigola sarda, which is essentially a pasta that you can use, and it does have a starch content. Produce it the same way as a risotto, cream it with cheese and butter at the end. Lentils. So some lentils, and these again are all from Pasquale Brothers, small packaging, so you can do individual servings. Farro, which is a wheat grain that you can use as well, and again does have a higher starch content, so you can cream it like a risotto. And then what they have there as well are some different risotto varieties. So these ones are already flavored. So this one would contain saffron already. So it's basically produced the risotto with a flavor already built in of saffron. And then the second one would be zucca, which would be pumpkin. So that would be produced in the same manner. Great for seasonability, thinking around October and doing more of a seasonal risotto that maybe you would be using sage as a flavor as opposed to some of the finer herbs that we're using today. And cream it up. You can even use brown butter as a layer just to build some flavor, okay? Okay, great. So let's talk about a little bit of the do's and don'ts with risotto and what we're going to do in terms of building flavors, okay? The one thing, number one, right off the bat, never wash a risotto. I know some of you probably will think that's not as hygienic as it could be. The reason behind it is because you don't want to lose the starch. By washing that arborio rice or your Canaroli rice, you're actually washing away the starch. Can you wash the rice? Absolutely, but in terms of the finish and the creaminess of the risotto that you're looking for at the end, the finish might not be as rich and creamy as a risotto that would be unwashed traditionally, okay? Some misconceptions about whether stir or don't stir risotto, and a lot of these are my own personal feelings towards how I've had best results in terms of producing risotto over the years. Definitely stir risotto. In the first couple of minutes you'll see that I don't, and that's only because I'll be toasting the rice itself to develop a layer of flavor. But after that, as soon as my stock is added, I will definitely use a spoon or a spatula, and I will continue to stir the risotto so that I can develop some of that starch. In terms of the final stages, that's when we'll be creaming the risotto. So that's when we'll get into doing a little bit of the cheese and butter at the very end, okay? So that's enough about risotto. Let's talk a little bit about some of the other things that are going along with the dish. I'll just pull the scallops out of the fridge. Okay. Scallops. So scallops, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with seafood. Being Good Friday, I thought it'd be good to do a fish or seafood dish. Scallops are actually a mollusk, and it's a bivalve, so it has two shells. And there's two components to the mussel itself. You're looking at an adductor, which is actually the mussel itself that you eat, and an abductor, which will remove, okay? So there's a little piece on the edge of the scallop that you'll see that you can remove, and the reason you remove that is that, here it is here. So there's just a little piece here that you'll just pull off, and the reason you remove it is it tends to be tough. So a lot of people, when they're eating scallops, they'll leave that piece intact, and unfortunately, they'll have a bad experience. They'll eat the scallop, and they'll believe that the scallop itself was tough. The other reason it can be tough is if you're overcooking it. A scallop, to me, should be served medium rare, so we're going to be searing one side, gently flipping it, and finishing it with a little bit of butter, and that's it. right? With the scallops themselves, we'll only be seasoning them with very mild seasoning because I want the flavor of the scallop to come through. So a little bit of kosher salt. Occasionally I might use white pepper, but for this particular dish, I won't be adding any black pepper at all to the scallops, only because I think it's a little bit harsh for the dish itself, okay? Any of the scallops you can buy at your local supermarket, or if you have a fishmonger, better yet, go to the fishmonger and ask them for fresh sea scallops. Fresh versus dry, it's really, availability will be the one thing. Is if frozen is available, then absolutely use frozen. But if fresh is available, I will always choose going fresh, and they're called dry scallops actually, okay? The one thing about the scallop, when we're going to place in the pan, and I'll show you that as well, there's two sides to the scallop. One side that would attach to the shell, the other side that would be on the upper layer of the scallop. They generally tend to be larger on the opposite side. So the underside will be a little bit smaller and the opposite side will be a little bit larger. And for presentation reasons, that's why I would choose for the larger side to be up, okay? So we'll just put these to the side for a second. Okay, the risotto itself. So some of the ingredients that we're using today, okay? So we have a mid-level olive oil. This is a very high-end olive oil that I'll be finishing the plate. It's Provenzani, and it's from Italy itself. The importance of the olive oil is just as important as the rice you're choosing. The variations in olive oil can be very complex, so they can be fruity and use them in a dessert dish, or this one is particularly peppery, which is what I was looking for in terms of a finishing oil, so to give it a little zip at the end. And it's very full flavored, okay? So that's why I'm using it as a finishing oil. There is a blended oil that I'm going to be used when I'm searing in the pan, because it would be waste to use such a high-end olive oil when I'm searing. But then some of the other ingredients that I'm using is really great Grana Padano cheese. Parmigiano Reggiano cheese. This is the arborio, so the cannaroli rice that we have, ready to go. Some kosher salt, some fresh bay leaves that are available at any supermarket these days. Some chopped garlic. I chose to use chopped shallots, but white onions are fine. Some Grana Padano cheese, so that's grated already, and those are just the shallots there, okay? And we'll obviously be using a little bit of white wine, and we'll talk a little bit about choice of wine as well, okay? Let me just put this on the stove. Again, going into choice of wine that we're going to use for the risotto. This one is Sauvignon Blanc, but Chardonnay would probably be a better choice for eating at the end and finishing with the risotto. So having a nice Chardonnay for dinner with the risotto and scallops, I think would be fantastic. However, any dry white wine would tend to be a better choice, and we're going to be using this just to deglaze the rice as it's cooking. And I think what we should probably do is get right to the rice. The rice is going to take about 15 minutes to cook completely. So we'll get the rice started and we'll come back and prepare the tomatoes. Okay, so he'll follow me over to the stove there. And just if there's any questions at any time, please just let me know and we'll go from there. We'll talk a little bit about stock as well. So me today, I chose to use chicken stock. However, in Italy, traditionally now what they're tending to do is use no stock. They'll use water, and that's because they want the rice and the cheese to shine. This is mild chicken stock, so I chose to use something that had very mild flavor as opposed to something that Parmesan cheese would be the star in this dish with the scallops, right? Okay. So I'm going to start with a low to medium flame. And I'm just going to start with a little bit of olive oil in the bottom of the pan. Really important as well, and that's why I was talking a little bit about the stock in the beginning, is that stock in the back has to be maintained at a boiling temperature, okay? So you want it simmering the whole time. And the reason you do that is because you don't want the rice temperature to change, to fluctuate. So I always want to have this dish simmering at all times. I do not want the dish at any time to get cold and then have to come back to temperature again, okay? So the whole time it'll be maintaining temperature. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with our shallots. And with the shallots, all I'm going to do is I'm going to sweat them in the pan, okay? So I'm going to do it with no color. I'm going to make sure that I develop the flavor out of the shallots themselves before I add any of my garlic in. Okay? What we're going to do as we are finishing the risotto is I will make sure that I have enough liquid in them, and then I'm going to step away and we'll produce some of the tomatoes and some of the other things while we're waiting for everything to cook through. Okay? So again, I choose to use a low to medium heat just because I don't want to scorch the shallots. Okay, just for a couple of minutes. And I like garlic, so I don't know about you guys, but I love garlic, so I'm going to add a good amount of garlic to the pan here. Okay. Okay. So again, when I'm cooking the garlic, the one thing I want to make sure is that at no point in time am I coloring the garlic. So I don't want to develop any color here. For some dishes in Italy you will. For some tomato sauces, what we'll do is we'll lightly toast the garlic, and the garlic will take a more robust flavor. But for this particular dish, again, because I think it's a very delicate dish in terms of the flavors, I want everything to speak for itself, so I don't want to cook it too long. Okay, and next, like we talked about before, we're going to toast the arborio, okay? Reasons for toasting the arborio rice. It gives a nuttier finish to the risotto. Actually, some other products that you can use to produce a risotto that's fairly that's familiar to most. A lot of people tend to use barley. And what we've done before at the club is we have taken the barley and roasted it in the oven, and it really changes color and really gives it a depth of flavor. But that's the main reason now for toasting the cannaroli rice. Okay. So just for a couple of minutes more, we're going to toast the arborio. I won't season this dish until the very end stages. Cheese itself tends to be very salty, so I want to make sure that the last couple of stages, that's when I'll adjust seasoning, just so that things aren't too salty. Let me know if I'm going too fast for anybody, or if you guys are already on the stove. Hopefully everybody's enjoying Good Friday, making a nice fish meal for everybody at home. Okay, white wine. Again, I'm going to turn that down and allow it to simmer. Hey everybody, how are you? So I added about 4 ounces of white wine there, and I'm going to turn it right down. The one thing about risotto is you can't rush it. You want to take your time, develop the starch and allow everything to happen on its own. So it's going to take about 15-20 minutes. So I'm really going to take my time cooking it, okay? It's really been a change for us cooking at home as much as we have been. Usually anybody that's in the industry and understands how much time you put in, you're not at home cooking as many meals as we have been, but lately it's actually been very enjoyable being at home with the kids and being able to cook some dishes that probably they haven't had either. How many people are cooking at home these days? If any of you have had to go out to supermarkets lately, and I'm sure some of us have, I have a big family, so we were out there yesterday, and it was just insane the amount of people and the lineups at the store. It was incredible. Okay, so the risotto's absorbed most of the white wine. So now we're at the point where we're going to add our stock. So in the beginning stages, I know we said about 7 cups of stock, but what we're gonna do is we're gonna add in just enough to cover my rice. And you'll see me coming back and forth as we're making the risotto, but I'm just gonna put enough at this stage just to cover the rice, okay? And that's kind of where I'm gonna leave everything right now. I'm gonna just turn it down and make sure this rice is simmering, okay? Again, no salt at this point. I'm not putting any seasoning, okay? I'm gonna put 1 bay leaf, and that's how it's gonna stay for now, okay? We're just gonna simmer it. So I'm gonna make sure that it's constantly simmering. Initially, it changed the volume of water, changed the boiling point, so it's gonna come back to a boil, simmer very quickly, and then it's gonna be constant the whole time. Okay, so we're going to turn that right down and just let it simmer. Okay, and now what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the tomatoes, to the other side, and we're going to go over to the table again, and we're going to take care of the tomato dish, the tomato salsa. Okay. Tomato salsa. So we're going to be using some very soft herbs here, very delicate herbs. And I'm going to talk very briefly about them. The tarragon at the grocery store wasn't the greatest, so I have a little bit of tarragon. But I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with tarragon. A lot of the recipes you can find on our website, on the YouTube channel, for some of the basic cuts. So how to chiffonade parsley, how to fine dice shallots, how to make concassé, which is a fancy French word for the flesh of the tomato cut very small dice, how to squeeze citrus juices, like really simple basics. And a lot of that had to do with my team at the club and having a very young team. Some of them are new out of school, and I wanted to make sure they have basic fundamentals. So that's why we went there. The salsa is so simple. So when we talk about the basics again, the herbs you use are not as important as the flavor that you choose the dish to end up being, right? So if you love dill, add dill. If you love parsley, add parsley. Chives, I chose tarragon. It has a little bit of an anisette flavor that I thought would go really nice with the seafood. But really the choice is yours at this point, okay? But we chose, for the salsa itself, I'm doing a little bit of chiffonade parsley and a little bit of chopped tarragon, okay? So this is how simple the tomato salsa is. I have the tomato concassé that we prepped earlier. We have some chiffonade parsley that we're just going to put in like that. We have some chopped tarragon that we're putting in like that as well. Okay. We have some kosher salt that we're putting here. Okay. We also have some good olive oil that we're just going to put in. A little bit of really good, this is that finishing oil I talked to you guys about. So it's very peppery, pretty traditional Italian olive oil. So it's very consistent to what would be considered an Italian olive oil. And then just some fresh lemon juice. And that's all you need. It's very, very simple. The dish itself is very rich with the cheese and the butter, and the scallops themselves are very rich. So I chose to do a little tomato salsa to cut some of that richness with the acidity. Okay. Just mix it with a spoon here. And we're just going to place this in the fridge just as the risotto is cooking, just to allow everything to macerate. Okay. The scallops themselves, we are going to wait until the scallops are closer, the risotto is closer to serving, and then we'll sear the scallops. They take minutes, so it's not a matter of having to wait a long time for those to finish. And then what we'll do is we'll do a little bit of plating, show you some of the tricks to plating, and that way you can plate like we do in the restaurant. I think that's great. We're going to need a little bit of cracked black pepper. If you could grab it for me, Billy, please. So in the tomatoes, I'm okay because it's an accent to the scallop. But I did not add it to the the scallop itself when I'm searing it. Okay, that's great. So I'm just going to put this in the fridge.
Oh.
And then we're going to get back to the risotto. Okay. So you can see the risotto is really simmering away here. I'm going to turn it down a little bit so that it's not too much of a boil. And at this point, I'm going to start checking the consistency of the risotto. So what I'm looking for is that the risotto, when I'm cooking it, still has a little bit of a bite. Okay. And at this point, what I'm going to get ready is my Parmesan cheese, my fine herbs that I have chopped already, and my butter. So again, I'll just turn this down so it's continuously simmering, and I'll get those ingredients ready to go. Okay, now it's the waiting process. The butter, taking it out of the fridge. Really important that the butter we took out of the fridge remained cold the whole time. So you can see how the sides were starting to develop some of the starch. And the dish itself probably has about 8 to 10 minutes. About 5 minutes out is where I'm going to start my scallops. Yeah, the rice is still quite firm. I can take this opportunity now to organize my scallops and my olive oil and everything like that, just so that when it comes time to plating, everything's ready to go. How's everybody doing? Do you have any questions? Any questions, guys? Mr. Nava, good day. Vincey's making rice for his wife at home. Brandon, how are you? Tom, hello. Noni, how are you? Jason, Good to see everybody. So we're getting a lot closer. The rice still has a ways to go. So we'll talk a little bit about the scallop again. The choice of oil that we're using for the scallops, we chose to use something that's not as high-end. Olive oil has a very low smoke point, meaning that it will tend to burn. And so what I did choose is a mid-level olive oil, but I mixed it with a little bit of regular canola oil, and that just gives me the ability to bring the heat up. It's the only time I tend to use high heat is when I'm searing, because we want the caramelization on the outside of the scallop. I actually unplugged my fire detector so that we're all good. There's no fire alarms and there's been no doorbells and no dog barking yet. So far we've been okay. But everything else is on track. So again, you can see I'm letting the stock and the risotto simmer right down almost to till it's gone. And then what I'll do is I'll add a little bit more. We never talked a little bit about the size of scallops that I'm using. Again, when we get into some chef lingo or terminology and we're talking about U10s or 1020s, 1315s, that generally means the size of the scallop itself per pound. So if it's 1315, it's 13 to 15 scallops per pound. 10 to 20 scallops is what we're using it today, which is a 10 to 20 scallop count per pound. Under 10 are really large scallops. For this dish, I'm using 3, which I think is more than enough for an entree size portion. And again, what we were talking about on the scallops themselves, and I'll wash my hands after I touch them here, is that there are 2 sides to the scallop. So there generally will be a smaller size and there will be a larger size. It's a little bit wider, so it's better for presentation on the plate. And the abductor we talked about as well. I still have to remove this guy, but the abductor is here that will remove. That's the tough part of the scallop that nobody wants to eat. Okay. Risotto is very close. Let me just wash my hands for a second. Either everybody has a pot of risotto on the stove and they're not talking, or what's everybody doing today? How's everybody? Hi, Noni. Vincey said he's making it tomorrow, everybody. Vincey, we do roadside delivery. So we're available to take it to your house. Billy will deliver. Something you can do if time is a factor is the rice itself in the restaurants, because not a lot of guests want to wait 20 minutes, 30 minutes for a risotto, is you can blanch the rice. So what we do with the process is we'll do the exact same thing. We'll do shallots, garlic, white wine with the olive oil, toast the rice, add the stock, and cook it about halfway. It's not exactly the same, but it is for a restaurant service. It is ideal in terms of wait times and stuff like that for the guest. I believe I'm going to have about 2 more additions of stock here. And then we're pretty good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start up my scallops. And I'm going to organize my herbs in that to the side. Definitely not a master, Vincey. But thank you. So the risotto again is still simmering. Water, the stock in the back has been simmering the whole time. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on my pan here and get it started to heat up. And I'm going to make sure not only is the pan dry, but I'm going to make sure that the scallops themselves are dry. Okay? So I'm just dabbing them and just making sure they're completely dry. And then like we discussed before, I'm gonna season. I'm not gonna put any oil on the scallops. I'm just gonna season with a little bit of kosher salt. Both sides is important, obviously. And risotto is getting very close. I can tell by the way it's simmering away there. Okay, so a little seasoning on the scallops. Then we talked about that olive oil, the blended olive oil that I had earlier. Put a little bit of olive oil in the pan. And I'm going to bring this up quite a bit. I want the heat to be fairly substantial there. And I have a small pair of tongs. Not on purpose, that's what I had. Use what we have. Okay, this risotto, at the very end stage, when the rice is very close to where you want it cooked, you're going to stop adding stock, okay? Risotto should eat, you think of cereal, so it should eat very creamy and loose. You're not supposed to be stacking risottos. Perfect. So I'm turning off the risotto now, okay? My scallop pan is working. Let me get the heat going again here. Technical difficulties. When you're placing anything, so I turned off the risotto because I don't want it to cook anymore. Now I'm going to cream it. But when I cream it, I'm going to add the cheese and butter at once. So I'm going to wait to get my scallops started here, then I'm going to finish my risotto. Okay. So I have, I would say, about 2, maybe 3 millimeters of the olive oil in the bottom, and I'm going to choose the side that I want to plate. It's not, you hear how there's not really any sizzle yet? There's a little bit. But I'm going to make sure that there's a good amount of sizzle there before I start, because otherwise the pan's not quite hot enough, okay? You hear that? That's really what you're looking for, okay? When you're placing the scallop, place them away from yourself so that the oil falls backwards. It won't splash you. So I want to make sure that when I'm placing them that if the oil did splatter, it would go towards the back. And then somebody would be upset that I messed up the kitchen at home. We're not mentioning any names here today. Okay, again, last scallop. There we go. Okay, scallops, what I'm looking for is I'm going to make sure that it has a nice golden edge before I even look to turn that scallop. It should almost be a third cooked before I turn them. The last stage is just going to be adding a knob of butter and then pushing it to the back to rest. And again, these scallops I want to serve medium rare, okay? Risotto, again, we talked about it's at the finishing stage. So now cheese, that cheese was all measured out beforehand. And the butter. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave a couple of small knobs of butter for the end for me to add to the scallops, okay? So risotto now, I'm just going to mix in all the cheese and butter. Okay, I might have to add a touch more stock. It's a little bit thick for me right now. And this is where I'm going to season, okay? So you can see how I'm just gently folding it in. Actually, the stock looks good. So it should cream. You think about, like I said, a cereal, a porridge, something like that consistency. It should not be a thick clump in the center of the plate. Okay? So risotto is pretty much finished. All we're going to do is adjust seasoning. Now I had very little seasoning in that other than the flavor of the stock. So I put a little bit of seasoning. I'm going to taste and then I'll adjust again. I'm going to put in my fine herbs and that's it, good to go. Great. Risotto should have a little bit of a bite. It should not be completely soft right through. Okay. So nice fresh herbs and some tarragon. Okay, we're just going to mix all that together. I'll feed the cameraman some. I'll feed you some. Maybe not. Maybe Billy wouldn't. So you see how it's tightening up, and that's going to happen because of the starch. So I'm just going to add a little tiny bit of stock. A little more. Just to keep it loose until I plate. Okay. Just like that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this over to where we're plating, okay? Now these scallops are almost there. So we're just going to check for color, okay? So there's a little bit of color. I would go a little tiny bit more, okay? I really want a deeper, that's better. A little bit deeper color on the scallop. Definitely there. You'll start to see the edges of the scallops themselves start to turn golden brown, okay? This is usually where your wife yells at you for making a mess on the stove. Okay, so we're just going to flip those. Those are about medium rare now. I'm going to take it off the heat. And I'm just going to add more of our butter. So we're just going to add a few knobs of butter. And we're going to baste those scallops, okay? So I'm going to push the scallop toward the back of the pan. And I'm going to allow that butter to turn into a beurre noisette, to a brown butter. And then I'm going to baste them, and that's how I'm going to continue to cook the rest of the scallops, okay? Just like that. We're going to allow this butter to brown, and it's going to give it a little bit of a nutty tone, okay? Like that, okay? And again, those should be served medium rare, so I think we're there. I'm just going to check them. And again, the way we'll check them is just check the sides. And yeah, we're definitely there. Okay, I would say I would probably end up giving a little bit more color to those scallops. Just the pan and the heat wasn't quite hot enough, but it's still, the color is not bad for presentation, okay? Go back to plating. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're just going to plate our final dish. So I'm just going to move a few things around for a second. I'm going to bring back out our tomatoes that we prepared earlier. Okay. Get all that marinated and mixed around, ready to go. I'm going to move some of this stuff around. And I'm going to mention a couple of the ingredients that I'm using to finish. So again, like we talked about earlier, the really important thing about cooking is to have fun with it. I think that's what I enjoy most, and probably what the kids say to me that they see that I enjoy most is I really enjoy creating menus and creating dishes, and really it's just using your imagination. Again, the techniques are the important thing. So making sure that the fundamentals are there when you're actually creating the risotto, you're using the correct techniques to produce a quality risotto, and then the rest is up to you. So what type of cheese you use, what herbs you choose, what type of seafood, if it's seafood, whether or not you're doing a red wine risotto instead of a white wine based risotto, okay? So what we're gonna do before everything gets too cold is I'll show you a couple of things that I'm using to finalize the dish. So I found these really amazing little pimento peppers from Pasquale Brothers as well. I also have a really high-end finishing balsamic vinegar. I have a great olive oil, and then some herbs, and this was from actually Fresh Start, so thank you for getting me these. Fresh Start got me these today, so you can buy these in the grocery store. Sleegers, I think is the name of the company. So that's some red sorrel. I have some pea tendrils, some fresh granite Parmesan cheese, and then as well some of the cracked black pepper, right? Okay. Well, and I did a Parmesan Tuile today too. So Parmesan Tuile, so easy to make. Think about a grilled cheese in a pan and the cheese slipping outside, that really great grilled cheese where the cheese slips outside the bread and ends up on the frying pan and it gets crispy and you love that piece. That's what that is. It's Parmesan cheese that I grated in the frying pan, brought it up to temp, nice and slow, and just allowed it to turn golden brown, and that's a tuile, okay? So I'm gonna plate the risotto so that you can see it. So I'm just gonna move a couple of things around here. So what I'm choosing to do with this risotto is I'm going to do a little bit of empty space because the plate is large, obviously. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of the risotto and I'm almost going to make an S in the center of my plate. Okay. So I'm going to spoon it down, make an S. And then I'll get the risotto pan out of the way so you guys can see exactly what we're doing. Which changed a lot over the years has been the number of hand touches on every plate. Years ago we would plate, it would still look great, but there weren't as many touches. Nowadays it's incredible. So the scallop, I don't want too much of the oil. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to place one on the end, one in the center, one on the other end here, so that I have like that S. I'm going to pick up some of that negative space, and I'll just move these out of the way as well. Pick up some of the negative space with those little pimento peppers that I think are beautiful, and they really work well with the dish. Okay. Those tomatoes that we did earlier, we talked about accenting the scallops. So I'm just going to sprinkle some, just put a little bit on the actual scallop itself, and they can spill off into the end of the plate there. Okay. My seedlings that we talked about, so some of my cress, I'm going to cut. And I'm just going to place in different levels of the dish. Maybe a couple of pea tendrils. Okay, and then the final touches would be really delicate, is a little bit of tuile. And that tuile will add a little bit of crisp, as well as some really punchy Parmesan flavor. So again, everything works, right? So everything makes sense. Some of that fantastic olive oil just drizzled. I don't want to drizzle too much. Okay. And just some of that really fantastic balsamic vinegar. And again, just a touch, just a pinch of flavor, but really punchy. Okay. And that is the dish, everybody. So fine herb risotto with seared sea scallops, tomato salsa, lemon herb tomato salsa, and some balsamic vinegar and some Parmesan Tuile. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy at home and happy Good Friday. Thank you.